Hey, so what's up with water levels?
The world of video games, much like other forms of entertainment, is no stranger to repeated tropes and archetypes. Whether it be killing enemies by stomping on top of them, shooting fireballs from your fingertips, or having 8 or so individuals single-handedly saving the world from God or the devil, or both, there are tons of aspects of games that have just sort of become commonplace in the industry as a whole. However, when it comes to level tropes and general gameplay mechanics, there is one archetype that stands in infamy above them all.
Thousands of people die from this every year.
The dreaded water level, easily the most despised and looked down upon aspect of gaming, and considering all of the other annoying shit that's in games already, that's saying a lot. While most video games will have you planted solely on the ground, running or jumping from level to level, all hell breaks loose the second your character is placed in any scenario involving water. Everyone hates water levels and everyone knows that they suck. But why is that? What is it with water levels that sparks so much anger and disdain from general gaming audiences? Well, today we'll be taking a look at what makes water levels the way they are, as well as discussing some of the more notable examples throughout the history of the medium. Now, if you remember when I talked about beach levels in the past, you'll know that I consider beach levels and water levels to be completely separate from one another. Both have very distinct aesthetics, and more often than not, water levels will have you exclusively controlling your character underwater, while beach levels generally have you still doing what you've been doing throughout the game already, just with a summer and sandy theme. I'm mostly saying all of this because if there's a game with a notable water level that I don't end up mentioning here, it may be because I consider it to be more of a beach level than a water level.
Super Mario Sunshine.
Okay, well, with all that out of the way, let's talk about H2O and why it's just so terrifying for gamers. Water levels have existed pretty much since the dawn of video games, i.e. when Super Mario Bros. Released way back in 1985. Okay, in all actuality, there were arcade games like Depth Charge and Polaris that released prior to the original Mario that primarily featured water levels through predominantly submarine-based gameplay. I would talk about these games more, but I mean, look at them. What do you want me to say? In Super Mario Bros., the core gameplay revolves around running and jumping in a straight line in order to reach the flagpole and progress on to the next level. For the first 5 levels or so, this is the primary gameplay setup, with the only deviations being in regards to changes in aesthetics, such as being in the overworld, underground, or in Bowser's Castle. However, once you reach World 2, you are introduced to the gameplay shift that is Underwater Mario. So now instead of having to manage Mario's jump and overall momentum in a 2D space while constantly moving forward, now you also have to worry about his vertical movement and general directions by mashing the A button in order to maneuver around new sets of enemies and physics. Now from a game designer's perspective, it makes a ton of sense to implement this kind of level into this kind of game. It changes things up while still remaining consistent with the general core design of running to the right as a middle-aged Italian man, and it introduces new enemies like the Cheep Cheeps and Bloopers, which have more sporadic movement patterns and are some of the greatest designed enemies in all of gaming. Look at these guys. The problem with these levels is that they're just not very fun to play when compared to the regular platforming stages. The water levels in Super Mario Bros. Are rather slow and feel less responsive than all of the other levels in the game, and the shift in mechanics is a little abrupt, which makes it difficult for players to instantly adjust on the fly to a new gameplay style. However, there's only like 3 of these types of levels in the overall game, and most of them can just be beaten by spamming the A button at the top of the screen anyway, so in the grand scheme of things, the water levels in Super Mario Bros. Aren't that bad. However, that didn't stop every other game developer at the time from looking at this template and saying, oh, this is so good, let's do that but worse. After Super Mario Bros. Release, tons of developers started implementing water levels into their own games in some form or another, which is really where we see the disdain for this level type start to emerge. In the NES/SNES era, a lot of water levels just took on the general design that Mario had already laid out previously. Floatier controls, having to worry about vertical and horizontal directions, or in the case of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles on the NES, trying not to rip your hair out due to pixel-perfect maneuvering with incredibly unresponsive controls and a claustrophobic space on top of a strict time limit.
Aw man, this game is so good, it really makes you feel like you want to kill a turtle.
However, as technology advanced and games began to look prettier, we got to see the standardization of more water level defining aesthetics be implemented into these levels, primarily with everything being dark and blue. On the NES, the color palettes were so limited that most game developers just settled on having a blue background in order to convey that what you were playing was indeed a water level. But the 16-bit generation was able to demonstrate that in a much more immersive and visually engaging way. However, some people obviously didn't think their water levels were engaging or immersive enough because some jackass at Sega thought it would have been a great idea to give Sonic an air meter. In the original Sonic the Hedgehog, Labyrinth Zone has you maneuvering through an underwater maze while having to deal with Sonic's oxygen supply and the stress of one of the most nerve-wracking tunes in all of gaming. Unlike other games where you swim throughout the water, Sonic games actually have you still doing the same type of platforming that you would be doing normally, albeit at a much slower pace due to being, you know, underwater. I guess it's caused by buoyancy or something, I don't know, I'm not a water nerd. Fun fact, the reason why Sonic doesn't swim in water was actually due to a misunderstanding by the development team that hedgehogs can't swim in water, which has weirdly become a main characteristic of the character even to this day. Anyway, while water levels in Sonic stay largely consistent with the rest of the game's design, it's still far from ideal. In water, Sonic moves incredibly slowly, and the slowdown that you get upon taking a hit is just absolutely dreadful. Weirdly enough, Sonic has had quite a few water levels throughout the series. On the Genesis alone, there's Labyrinth Zone, Chemical Plant, and even Hydrocity Zone, or Hydrocity Zone depending on your political stance. Aquarium Park from Sonic Colors, though, is probably my favorite water level in the series. It's just so colorful and fun to play through, and is easily a standout among all the other areas from that game. Let's not talk about Big's fishing levels, okay? As video games began to shift to 3D, water levels immediately became much more complicated due to having to deal with a full 360-degree range of movement compared to the 4 directions previous games had to worry about. Due to the shift in controls, water levels almost instantaneously became much worse. Since this was also a generation of introducing and defining early third-dimensional graphics, lots of games on the N64 and PS1 have water levels that are just really difficult to navigate on top of having control issues. So take that lack of navigation in sight, mix it with bad early 3D controls, and bam, Tomb Raider 2. Where am I? Water levels are predominantly defined by abrupt/clunky gameplay shifts, slow controls, dark and damp aesthetics, and the color blue, and it just so happens that most 3D games from this point forward would feature these annoyances in some way, shape, or form. Take Super Mario 64. Now it's definitely aged in some places, but the core general gameplay is still pretty snappy and engaging. That is until you dive into the water and have to deal with Mario's slow swimming controls and an air meter, because I guess Italians can breathe in space but not under the sea. Conker's Bad Fur Day has a similar issue, wherein it's difficult to control and it's hard to see where you're going. You have a light that you're forced to recharge frequently, and you once again have to deal with an air meter, represented by Conker's face growing more and more uncomfortably realistic the more he begins to drown.
Aw man, this game is so good, it really makes you feel like you're an orange squirrel whose lungs are slowly filling up with water.
Skies of Arcadia's underwater movement at Mount Kazooie is slower than the progress the worms in my brain are taking and reaching my medulla. Earthworm Jim has you controlling this incredibly fragile glass dome that breaks super easily and forces you to replay the entire level all over again. And MGS2 has clunky third-person swimming controls with 2 oxygen meters that you have to worry about instead of 1. Man, fuck oxygen.
We've managed to avoid drowning.
Okay, so I think we've clearly laid out why water levels are less than desirable in games. But does that mean that every water level is automatically bad? Well, no, not really. The Mega Man games feature a ton of water levels, but still predominantly have you playing the game the same way you would normally, only this time with a much higher jump that you need to be wary of during precise platforming moments. This is also exactly how Shovel Knight handles its water mechanics, which makes a lot of sense given how many cues it takes from Mega Man and other NES and SNES platformers. A lot of the time, water levels also give you some kind of tool or object in order to make maneuvering throughout the water a little bit easier. Super Mario 64 gives you a shell that drastically increases your speed at the slight cost of control. Donkey Kong has On Guard, which acts similarly and gives you a stabbing attack in order to deal with enemies. Sonic 3 has the Aqua Shield, which completely removes the need to grab air bubbles. And the Zora Mask and Majora's Mask lets you act like a dolphin and swiftly swim throughout the water. It's also important to note that games that dedicate their entire focus to underwater gameplay also manage to avoid a lot of the trappings that other games fall into, due to them having much more time and energy to flesh out these concepts in a creative and interesting way. Games like Starfy, Abzu, and Echo the Dolphin come to mind when I think of good underwater gameplay experiences. I would put Subnautica in this category as well, but I've seen the Leviathan and I think I'd rather hibernate in my bathroom where it's safe than ever try that game ever in my life, so I think I'm good. Though I guess Echo's got some weird stuff going on too. Anyway, with all of the aspects of water levels we talked about today, we've left out what is arguably the most notable aspect of them all: the music. I don't know what it is about music and water levels, but it almost feels like a law for them to always have amazing tracks. Water levels almost always have compositions that are incredibly soothing and calming for the game they're featured in, and the tracks really help to push the overall aesthetic of the level to new heights when paired with the visuals and overall level design. You know, for all of the crap I've been giving Mario today, I'd be lying if I didn't think that Dire Dire Docks was one of the best pieces of video game music I've ever heard, and it only gets better from there. Aquatic ambience from Donkey Kong Country is absolutely blissful on the ears, Aquarium Park from Sonic Colors manages to feel laid back and energetic at the same time, Bubble Man's theme is mysterious and exciting, the Atlantica music from Kingdom Hearts 2 is... you know what? Let's just wrap things up here. So, water levels. They're pretty bad. They're often annoying, slow, hard to play through, and can be difficult to adjust to for a variety of reasons. Listen, while I do have a ton of problems, I can't help but enjoy some of the better parts of these levels. Are they mostly bad? Oh, absolutely. But I can't help but appreciate aspects such as the presentation and music that these levels provide when compared to other level types such as snow or desert levels. Like the stupid worms in my head giving me brain rot, just love the music and general look of these levels too much for me to flat out hate water levels in their entirety. I also happen to like the color blue in case you haven't noticed. Plus, when a water level gets it right, it really gets it right. The Donkey Kong games have fantastic water levels, getting to swim as a Cheep Cheep in Mario Odyssey is really fun, and you can never get me to hate the music in Chemical Plant. Look, when there's a bad water level in gaming, I'll happily point it out and shit on it like everyone else. But when a water level is good, it can be absolutely fantastic. Okay, you may have noticed a water temple-sized hole in this water level-based discussion, but the fact of the matter is that I haven't played Ocarina of Time yet. I know, it's almost like I hate video games or something.
So if there's one thing you can take away from all of this, it's that holy shit Blitzball in Final Fantasy X is the f***ing worst.